Wonderful. So thank you very much, Jennifer, for having me, and everyone who's come, welcome. My name is Neil Weijer, and I'm curator of the Rare Book Collection here at the University of Florida in the Special Collections Department in the libraries. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is kind of the nuts and bolts of, well, how to do research in the collections. So I'm calling this talk how to do new things with old books, but there should be an asterisk after books, because I could actually call it how to do new things with old books and papers and documents and stuff, because we have all of those things here in the collections. And really, as a research university, we keep these separate because they need special care, but they're here for you to use. They're here for you to experiment with, and they're here for you to create new knowledge from. So even though we keep them behind closed doors, you are encouraged to come and see them for yourselves. Let's see, move this forward. So normally I would be welcoming you here to the Grand Reading Room in Smathers Library, but due to, well, at this point, foreseen circumstances, we're really happy to be able to bring the library to you in whatever form that we can. So I will say that the library is open for appointments. So if you find materials in the collections, you may get in touch with us and come and look at them in the room. That's what we're doing this semester. But usually, the room is open for studiers, for readers, and it is just another one of the spaces that we have for you to learn in. So what we're going to talk about today, for the first part of the presentation, is the library, the Smathers Library and its collections. I have a few examples of research materials and the potential questions you can ask of them, the potential opportunities that they offer, and then a little bit on how to get started, how to engage with these materials, and really just things to get you in the door and working with the collections. So to start out with, a little bit of information about the library is kind of in order because it helps explain kind of why we have what we have, and the fact emphasizes the fact that we've been really many things to many people over the course of US history. So this library, which from this old photo, this is actually the corner of the Plaza of the Americas. So Library West would be where the trees are. Was one of the first buildings built on campus. It was finished in 1925, and it was originally just the library for the entire university. If you went to read a book, you came here, and you read it in the Grand Reading Room. Now, over the years, as the university grew into a research library, this is a picture post-war with an addition. The library began to house specific types of collections, some of the area studies like the Latin American collections that are still here, and then eventually the reading and circulating collections of the library. Collections like mine have grown through acquisition, but also because they're tied in with the past research interests of all the departments here at the university. So books have come into the Rare Book collection from all around the world, but they've also come from here on campus, from the collections of some of our earliest faculty members up to faculty serving in the departments in the present day. So what we have in the library is, in the department here, is actually 13 separate collection areas. We have a very wide range of subjects and disciplines. So we cover area studies like Latin American, Caribbean, Judaica, Florida history, and Africana studies, which have kind of developed under their own care. We have museum and archaeological collections, as well as archives around the Panama, the canal, and the people who lived there while it was still a US protectorate. And then we have print collections like mine. So as a resource, we do have a little bit of everything and a very lot of some specific things. So with that out of the way, I'm going to talk about some of the opportunities and some of really the ways that you'll go about doing research in a library setting, in a humanities setting, that may be different from some of the research opportunities that you've either taken advantage of at UF so far, or that you know from your own discipline or major. Um, Research in the libraries can be collaborative when there's not a pandemic, and it can be collaborative in digital spaces. But really, a lot of what we can learn from the collections here, both those that are digitally available and those that you have to access in person, is not so much just what they say, but also how they say it. And those are two real key points of investigation that you can address whenever you look at material in an area collection or a special collection. As I mentioned, they came here not because we needed to get one of everything, but because at different points in their lives, different people, different groups of people have found them interesting, necessary, possibly even dangerous. At other times, they've really worked hard to advance technology just to convey knowledge. And all of those topics are free for investigation. And this is what I'll kind of get into here in just a minute. Um, so I've pulled out 3 books from the Rare Book collection, which is a small but not entirely representative sample of what we have here. But they are things that I think illustrate these approaches pretty well. So what I'm going to have to do, since normally I'd have them out on a table, is just kind of mute myself for a second, turn off my video, and swap the camera so that we can see them. So I will hold on this first case, which I should say I am an early modernist by training. I'm a medievalist and an early modernist, so old books are some of my favorites. They are not the most accessible ones for research, but some of them really kind of give you a long sweep of the ways that people try and convey technical information over time. So this book, just by way of introduction, is not the one I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a more modern one. But this book comes from one of the most famous engineering problems of the Renaissance, which is how do you move an obelisk? In the late 16th century, the Pope wanted to have the obelisk in front of St. Peter's Basilica moved, and nobody had quite known how it got there in the first place. So an enterprising engineer named Domenico Fontana devised this system of horses, pulleys, and scaffolds to actually lower the obelisk and wheel it across the plaza to where it sits now. This book in real life takes up about the size of a table, and the fold-out diagram in it is larger than the book itself, because in order to convey all of the diagrams, which he published to say this is how you move a Roman obelisk, really an ancient Egyptian obelisk, he needed to harness as much print technology as he had engineering know-how. So keep that in mind as sort of a precursor to the book that we're going to see. I will be right back with you in a second once I get it set up. Okay, um, let me move this just a little bit. Um, can someone just, since I'm sharing my full screen now, can someone just let me know if you can still hear me?
Yep, we can still hear you.
Okay, wonderful. So what we're looking at now is a portfolio. It's a book from about 300 years after the one that you just saw, but it works in the very same principle. This is a series of reports that when the the state of Pennsylvania was looking to expand its infrastructure, they sent an architect whose name was William Strickland, you can see here, over to England. And he spent a year studying everything that he could possibly diagram and document about the ways that canals, bridges, and railways worked. He sent this material back to us in a series of reports. And you can see that as he walked through, he visited some of what were then the most advanced and complicated engineering projects of his time. He was interested in gathering instruments, in observing the drawings of, in this case, an aqueduct or other engineering features. And most specifically, he was really fascinated by this, which was the Thames and Medway Tunnel. It was the first time, one of the longest tunnels that had not just a footpath, but also a canal dug in it. So we can see on some of these diagrams in this collection of plates and drawings and reports, Strickland's name over here on the very end of the portfolio means that he was gathering these things in a sketchbook and drawing them so that other people could later transfer them to copper plates and engrave them on portfolios, which, again, if you get a sense of how large my hands are, this book is about twice as wide as a normal book. So you can see in these sorts of collections, really, the diagrams of what were then some of the most advanced engineering capacities of his time, from aqueducts to rail engines here. So just getting these things to a global community, or in this case, a transatlantic community, required not just the skills of an architect and a draftsman, but printers, publishers, and the like. And so, especially for those of you who are interested in sort of the sciences, one of the most interesting questions to look at when you're using these books is not just what they have, what they show, but what kinds of knowledge they assume their readers have, and what kinds of knowledge they assume the makers need. Our collections are full of historical and natural historical specimens that really kind of highlight this transfer of knowledge on a global scale. So one of the projects that you can undertake, and people often do, is kind of comparative study of the history of a technology or the history of a discipline. And that's something that we're very well equipped to do. Let me jump back to this, and we'll go to our next example. I will do the same thing. I'll kind of set this up and we'll get going again in just a second. Okay, and I have to apologize for the blue and orange. My computer has had so many different cameras attached to it over the quarantine that it really kind of is trying to find whichever one is right. But at least they're blue and orange, so I'll go with that. Our second book is this little pamphlet, which you actually saw on your the slide that was introducing you to the collections. And this is another American production, and it deals with the kind of technical capacities that we need to actually convey natural history knowledge. Natural history in earlier periods was conceived of as literally anything that had been written about the known world. But by the 18th and 19th centuries, it had still, while it still had some of those resonances of understanding the ways the world worked, it really was a way of showcasing the foremost scientific and technical knowledge. And that's what happened in this book, which was written in the early 20th century by a tradesman, a timber merchant named Roman Howe. And what it is a study of the different hardwood tree specimens in America that he could find, and their physical features, their commercial applications. But in order to actually convey that to somebody who would use it, a craftsman, he needed to create hundreds of these. Which you can see are cross sections of the different trees, the different wood species that he could find. So this, you can see, is actually kind of, it's almost a work of art, and it required the invention of a new device. Howe obtained a patent for the machine that cut all of these little tiny grains of wood. If you put them up next to a light or under a light, they're really quite fantastic. They're almost like art. But again, if you think about this book in its time and its context, it conveyed something that people, practitioners, actually really needed to know. That is, what happens to this tree if I cut it up and I use it for furniture? Howe's subscription to this series was what made it possible. He actually sold greeting cards that were modeled off of these cross sections to people to raise money for the production of more books. But one of the things that I like about this particular copy is this little number here is actually an accession number for this particular volume, which, because it's so low, means that it was one of the earliest books that we actually took into the library. And this came from the forestry school, the study that was there. The other thing that I love about it is that the 14 volumes of this set all come in a case that looks like a book. So even though Howe and his publishers were doing something that was completely off the wall, when we think about the way that books actually work and act and function, exactly, it was a power move. It was basically the idea of saying the people who are buying this, and more importantly, the libraries that are using this, need to have a way to put this on their shelves. So we literally need to have a box to put this knowledge in. And since it's going to a library, it needs to look like a book. So again, the sciences, really, the way that we think of the exchange of information, are so full of this type of innovation and exchange, and in some cases, limitation. And really assessing what somebody thought they were doing, and who they were speaking to when they put this material together, is a great set of questions that you can bring to any one of these volumes. All right. So I've got one more. And this is a case that is near and dear to my heart as well. You can also study not just the efforts that went into the production of books and documents and artifacts, but you can study what they've meant to different people at many different moments in their existence. So our last category is an earlier book, and it's an earlier classical volume. But one of the things that really is special about the materials in the rare book collection are the stories that they tell about the times and places they've been through and the ways that people's attitudes towards them have changed. So once again, on the other side of the break, I will be right back. Okay, so because, like I said to you guys, I am an early modernist and a medievalist, I'm going to bring out something of one of our oldest books in the collection. Not the oldest book, but this one is kind of up there. And this is, if you can think of an encyclopedia of knowledge from the 15th century, this is what it would look like. So this is a book that was printed in 1492. And you can see as an object, it has some of the markings of a regular book that we would associate with now. It's got lovely decorative tooling on this pigskin leather, but the title of it is not on the front. It's actually down here on the side, because this is how the book would have been stored. So this is the collected works of Virgil, the Roman poet, and it was printed in 1492 by the Nuremberg printer Anton Koberger. And it shares the features of many of the earlier books that have been printed before it. So space has been left for initials to be added for the letters that guide you through the text. These little red marks called paraphs were also added by the person who was adding the initials. And you can see is all of this text around here is what's called a gloss or a commentary. And so by the time printers had been recycling and recollecting the works of classical authors like Virgil, like Homer, and for natural history like Pliny the Elder, they would include just the text of Virgil, which is here in this little section, and then all of the commentary that was keyed to individual words. You can actually see within this, all of this little red writing is what's called an interlinear gloss. So a student has gone through this book and actually written out what the words mean or other synonyms or other uses for them in between the lines. So this becomes a book that you can use to read not just what Virgil wrote, in this case in the Bucolics, but what previous scholarship had written about Virgil, and then really about what Virgil's own language means. So if you see this book as kind of a work in progress, which is an odd way to think about something that is so massive and so sort of insistent that it's complete, you get a different appreciation of what it means to study books at different times. Especially works of education and science were never really finished. They were always works in progress. They were always waiting for somebody to come and experiment with them and add to that knowledge. So that will wrap up our very brief tour of books. And now what I'd sort of like to say is, now that you've gotten these things, how do you get going with them? What sorts of places do you go to look for rare books or special collections? And so the easiest way to do that is to basically start not with just our catalog, but really with our website. Special collections have kind of a tricky way to them in that they were cataloged as separate collections in lots of cases. And they were cataloged with the assumption that people already kind of knew what they were looking for to find them. Um, we are working to correct that, but there's a lot of material here that we have to get through. So if you were looking through our collections for archives or manuscripts or collections of things that aren't books, you may well not be able to find them in the digital library catalog. Um, but you might actually find them. Let's see if I can get out of that by going here and seeing if you can get an introduction to all the separate collections that we hold. So on this page, which is the collections page of our own website, this is a great place to start because you can find information about the different materials, the different collection areas that we hold, as well as things that we feature. The library catalog is a useful place to get looking for books, but it really helps to be a little bit more open in your searching. So if you know an author or a subject or a topic from somewhere else, you can plug it into the catalog and see what we have. The other thing that you can always do is you can always ask one of us, one of the curators in the collection, for help. We are all here to help you navigate the resources that we have. And we're all here to learn, really, as I do every day when I go and look in the stacks for something. The one last thing that I want to show you while I have these tabs open is kind of what can you do? What pace does this research take? Because I've said that what you're looking for is, not just what things say and as much as what they say it is, how they say it. So once you take the time, and doing this kind of research takes time, I'll not, make any bones about that. The ways that people have kept and stored information has not been as open and transparent or accessible as some of the ways that we do now. But once you have the time of figuring out what something says, once you, to return to annotated books, if you spend a long time staring at the scribbles in the margins of manuscripts, you might be able to eventually do some pretty cool things with them. So this is the 16th century edition of a book on military strategy that was read by an Elizabethan political counselor, together with a team of people in a former life before I came here. We transcribed some of these annotations, but we also encoded them in XML. So if you were to click on some of these different people, places, texts, you actually are able to navigate this book in a way that you never would have been able to just by using it in its physical form. And there are lots of digital spaces that, or digital tools that can take advantage of these types of research strategies. So if you have spatial networks of relationships, chronological networks that you've gathered from your research, you can eventually turn them into something that is much more visual and much more intuitive in a digital space. So that's a little bit of the how and the why. And I will say that generally, this is a learning process, as it is for all of us. But really, what it takes is patience, and that pays off, because as you come through the process, as you work with more and more things, all you find are more questions, and all you find are sort of more opportunities to get in touch with, in some cases, very different parts of knowledge, very different places and times, but you feel connected to them in a way that you wouldn't if you were just sort of reading PDFs on a screen. So with that, I'll open the floor up for questions. If there are more questions about the books, we can always go back to this, but I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation, and want to thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk to you. hopefully I'll see some of you in here, or see some of you virtually here soon. Thank you.
All right, who's got questions? That was pretty amazing. I'm not gonna lie. I was a little envious of the wood book thing. Like I want to own that myself just because that's the coolest thing ever.
The wood book is ridiculous. Um, I'll just say that right away. And it's one of those things where, like I said, a I'm a medievalist. Nobody's making books out of sections of wood in the Middle Ages. So when somebody said there's a book that has wood in it, I was like, well, I pulled that out. I'm like, that's what it is. But I never thought anybody would do that.
All right. Is it possible to see a list of all the books in the rare collection or something, or do you have to know what to search in the catalog?
So there are places. Really, the books in the rare book collection are cataloged. They're all entered in our online catalog. So if you search for something, you can either run an advanced search in the library catalog and limit the location to special collections, rare books, um, or you can just do an advanced. You can do an advanced search, or you can search for something like the name of an author, and then kind of filter your search by facets. So it's not really possible, nor is it uh, recommended to generate a list of all the books that are here. There's about 60,000 separate volumes in the collection, but
That's a lot
uh,
of books.
but yes, we have them kind of broken down into some areas, and especially if you have faculty that you work with, you can always kind of go and you can ask them for topics, ask them for places to start. Because the library is kind of it's a collection of books, but it's also a collection of people. That's what an early modern library was, and that's very much what a special collections library is. Um, so I'm seeing, thank you. Um, I'm seeing a question about the oldest work. I actually made a video about the oldest book that we have in the collection. So I can maybe share that with you guys through email. But the oldest book we have in the sense of writing on paper is a medieval, it's a 13th century manuscript, but it has been rebound and reused at least 4 times over its life. So the writing of it is old, but the book itself is newer. Um, so Alex is asking, would we consider annotated books primary or secondary resources? Now, that's a really good question. Annotated books are almost always primary sources. Um, they are they are objects of study, because usually what you're doing is interpreting one person's use of the object. Um, the other thing, rare books can also be both primary and secondary sources, or primary sources at different times. So the edition of Virgil might be, not an original first century writing of Virgil's works, but it would be a primary source for studying the production and circulation of knowledge in the Middle Ages. And it is a primary source for studying the way books were made in their earliest period. So yeah, generally as your project, if you're looking at something specific to the book itself or the copy, then those copies are actually even beyond just the same an edition of a book. You cite them individually as to where they are. Um, so Lauren, no problem. Lauren is asking, when you handle the books, are there certain guidelines? Yes, there are, and you can kind of see on the camera. I have the books that I'm using here on foam rests. I have them basically supported so that their spines are not going to be strained. I handle them gently, but really, you handle these books with your bare hands, as long as they're clean, and you're not allowed to bring food, drink, pens, anything that could mark them permanently anywhere near them. If a book comes to us marked, we keep it that way, but we try not to add anything else. So those are guidelines that I'm happy, for new researchers to walk people through. But really, they kind of fall down to just being being careful with the material, being deliberate when you turn pages and when you look at things, and just making sure that everything is supported. Um, the other good thing to remember is that, especially now that you can take pictures of everything, you want to find a way to keep track of the pictures that you are taking when you do research in a collection, because you'll be amazed how quickly you look at something and you're like, I can't remember what page number that was or what book that was. Um, so I started working with these collections or rare collections as an undergraduate, and I was blown away by that fact because I didn't think that I should be able to do that. But really, like I said, this is what these things are here for. These objects are here for. Um, and Priya has asked, does the collection have works that have been banned in the past? Yes. Um, we have actually some of the original lists of banned books in the forms of the first index of prohibited books that was published in the late 16th century in response to Protestantism. We have books that have been censored by their users, either because they contain material that was thought to be heretical or material that their readers just didn't particularly like. So some of our early scientific books have censored markings. Some of our earlier theological ones do too, and some of our children's books have scribbles and graffiti in them from people who didn't treat them the way that we might expect a book to be treated. Um, all of those things are actually objects of study in their own right, because looking at early censored books really gives you a different view of what it meant to try and contain knowledge. Often what people were taking offense to was a small part of a work and not the whole thing. So one of the most famous examples of that is sort of Copernicus's theory on the revolution of the heavens. That book is often censored, but his actual astronomical findings are not censored as heavily as his comments on the church fathers who had written about astronomy before him. So rather than, we kind of think about censorship as a binary of you can read this book or you can't. People in earlier times and places really had a sense of, well, maybe we can't read that part or we shouldn't read this part, but there's still useful knowledge here. And there's still knowledge that can be worked with. So yes, censored books or otherwise modified books are a great field of study in this collection, or really in any collection at any time.
Are there books still being banned now?
I think so.
Clearly not in the United States, I would imagine, no, but in some countries probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we still have, I think there is a banned books week where we kind of showcase things that have been, and even if not at a national level, there are still books whose use is restricted at a secondary school level. And so there is this kind of ongoing debate over curricula in general of what should people read and what shouldn't they. And I think we do have some historic examples even of books in the collection. Some of our holdings in early sort of African Americana were not kept in regular circulation for a while because the librarians thought that they could be subject to vandalism if they stayed on the shelves. So there's kind of instances of self-censorship in attempts to either keep the books safe or to protect them from other people, which again we don't do as much of now. But we still, if books come in that are, not all the books in rare books here are old, and not all of them are numerically rare. Sometimes they make sense as a collection, and that's why they end up here. But yeah.
Very cool. Any other questions from anybody? Those were some great questions, though.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Doesn't look like I'm just getting some thumbs up. That was really good, and I really, really appreciated it. If there is anything else you'd like to send along that I can add to our course? I'd be happy to add it. Very fascinating. Just seeing the room that you showed the picture of, the reading room. I don't think
Mhm.
I've ever been in that building, but that might be the coolest place on campus.
Well, it is. I mean, it's a resource, like I said, that usually it's open for studying, but it really is something where no matter what your, no matter what your discipline, no matter what your major, there's probably something in here that may speak to you. It could be a pop-up book or a movable from the 20th century in our children's collection. It could be like a really old medieval manuscript. Um, but really the reasons the collections are still here, and they're still in that room, is to give you a chance to do something that nobody else has done with them. And it's really, it was eye opening for me, and I kind of hope that more people are able to take advantage of it.
Very
So
nice.
yeah, I've got the slides. I can send the contact information, I guess, at the end in a more clickable form.
Yeah,
Um,
that would be great. And we are going to be brainstorming in class tomorrow. So this might give the students some things to think about for their possible projects, would be really, really nice. So um, students are definitely free to go now, but we do thank you again for presenting to everyone. And like I said, that was fantastic. I really appreciate it.
all right, thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you.